Welcome to the INSCAPE World podcast, where we explore our unique power to connect and create. My name is Tanya Nelson, and joining me in this episode is serial entrepreneur, business owner, and master of the INSCAPE, Chris Scanlon. We're going to be discussing what it means to find our true power in the INSCAPE, our inner world, and how to use it in all areas of life to achieve success. Keep listening for the rare opportunity to get a glimpse into his world and challenge your ideas of power and success. I don't know if I've ever witnessed anyone who has really mastered this the way that you have. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but I don't think it does, because I've been able to really witness, I think to quote Gatsby, I want to say like this experience of within and without. I've watched you do that and had conversations with you. And I definitely feel like you have mastered this and you've consciously mastered it, right? So I think that so many people don't realize or are conscious of what they're doing. But I know firsthand that you have. And so really talking about the power within and how you've been able to receive and line up with so much is something that I really want to talk about. The power of going into the INSCAPE, the power of going within yourself. And I think I just would love for you to start off just really talking about your journey a little bit, your story, and what it is that you do. And I mean, you've had relationships with so many powerful people, and you've lined up with, people across the world. And I just think your story and what you do is so fascinating, and what you've lined up with. It's not like as a little kid, I think you knew that's what you were going to do. So tell me a little bit about your story and what it is that you do. And I think that'll be a good way to kick it off.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So, okay. So, it's always interesting because like I spend very little time in the past, and my mother-in-law hates that because I don't take pictures. I don't really do pictures. I don't look through the past. And it's not that it's not beautiful and wonderful, because there are so many things that have helped me to become who I am today that have been a part of my journey. And I think probably the easiest way is like to describe it is I grew up in a home where we were experiencing a lot of firsts as a family. So like, we were a blended family. My mom had I would say the guy that I call my dad, he's my stepdad, and it was my mom's third marriage, his first marriage. And my mother was an immigrant from Argentina to the US. And so everything was about, trying to adapt to the way of American life. And there's so many wonderful things about America. I mean, for people who have, been able to experience cultures from around the world, America has some very special things because of the ability to have freedoms. Perhaps some of those are perceived freedoms, but for people to be able to govern themselves in a way, whether it's beliefs, whether and I think like in Utah it's also a little bit interesting just from a religious perspective, but yeah, so the freedoms that you have as an American are very different than what you have as somebody who's living in, let's just say, Iran or India or even places throughout Europe. But having said that, I think what's interesting is our experiences, and what I've learned over the years is that our experiences are perfect for what we are trying to learn, and what I think our souls really are trying to experience in expanding consciousness. And so me as a little boy, I wanted to experience the world around me. I wanted to understand it. I feel like the innocence of children is very much probably, I would say, the one thing that we dismiss, because we have to be proper and mature, and people have to feel like we're good communicators and that we're able to do all these amazing things, and if people don't fit that mold, then somehow we've got to give them a different label.
Yeah.
And coming from an immigrant background, and a very different home. Like we were not wealthy at all. We were lower middle class, and my parents tried really hard to provide us with everything. But I began to see the world in a lot of different perspectives, because I grew up in Miami, number one, where there's a melting pot of cultures. And when you have an extreme of extreme poverty and extreme wealth, in any place, the contrast shows you what's possible. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, just kind of interjecting here for a moment, I can tell you that even now, we look at our challenges that are presenting the contrast for us, and the ego is putting, a label on that, and that's creating some pain for us.
Yeah.
And so we have this belief around what our life should be versus what's actually happening. And when you take that step back, and maybe that's part of the process of looking back, perhaps. But when you take that step back and say, "Wow, okay, well, it's not necessarily that my life isn't turning out how I want. It's that I'm now able to see all the things that I don't really align with anymore."
Yeah.
And those beliefs as a kid, I mean, I'll just run through a quick list of them. I remember growing up and my dad just trying to instill this amazing work ethic in me of, you have to, work harder, faster, better than anybody else out there. If you want to be somebody,
Yeah.
you have to be the best. And it was always that there was this goal to achieve outside of myself, right? As opposed to, as you talked about, going within.
Yeah.
And it created like a real struggle. And I feel like a lot of people experience that because, in society, it's like you are a nobody until you become a somebody. Well, then who
Yeah.
defines what a somebody is?
Yeah. You're not valuable.
And
You're not worth anything until you prove that.
right.
Yeah.
So, for my parents, it's like you got to go to school. You got to, like I remember being young, 13 years old, and wanting to be a lawyer and a doctor at the same time, just thinking that those were like the safest professions I could be
Yeah.
in, so that I could be somebody of importance in my life. And
For
and I
everybody else.
think, well, that's exactly what I was about to say, right? When you
Yeah.
think about my life, it was not necessarily my life. It was the life that I want my parents to feel like I've done a good job with what they've given me.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting, because I think that like right now in society, like there's so much information that's out there. It's like, how do you identify with what's real? And that's one of the toughest parts with being a child as well, is that the only world that you know is the one that your parents teach you.
Yeah.
And your parents do it with love, if I would say, in most cases. And unfortunately, there are some cases where, they have some parents who are really hurting within, and the child suffers as a result of that pain because of those choices the parents make. But even so, that's the only world that you know as a child. And so, like, for me, like, I didn't know anything else beyond that until, growing up in Miami. I remember my friends talking about, things like, Lamborghinis or Ferraris, or, these things of opulence. And I'm like, oh, well, what's that? And I remember there was a moment where, I'd say several moments where I felt ashamed about, some of the things that my family was experiencing, with really old used cars, and and all of a sudden, like, my self-worth of what I was identifying with as worthy of life was diminished.
Yeah.
And and I think, again, like, I think that another, key contributor to that belief system was, I think, obviously, whatever people ascribe to from a religious or spiritual perspective, like whatever they align with. For me, like, my family was very, very very, very much into things that provided a sense of community. And I remember, my dad wasn't affiliated with any religion, but my mom wanted that sense of community for us. And there are really wonderful things in every religion. I mean, I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think it's a part of everyone's, spiritual journey, as far as where they're going, to be able to get to a place where they turn within. And again, it just so happened that my parents ended up becoming Latter-day Saints, and ended up becoming Mormons. And as a result of that, us as the kids, we became Mormons too.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that was the way of life and the way things had to be. And so we were busy trying to adapt to these different communities so that we could fit in and be accepted. And so you go on and you live this life of constantly trying to meet these different areas of approval.
Yeah.
And and I was so eager as a child to always fulfill whatever that definition was from my parents, that I lost my sense of my spiritual self, right? Because I
Yeah.
only could personally identify with something that lived outside of me. And so
Well,
yeah,
and
so just
not just for your parents at this point, because now we're talking about a God. We're talking about
right.
something even bigger, and now we have even more to prove
Yeah. And
to pass this
you know
test, right? More to do.
and I lived my life for a very long time like that. And I remember, I served an LDS mission. I'm so grateful for that experience. It was wonderful for me. But, again, like looking back on it, there are certain things that, I wouldn't have done the same knowing what I know now about me. And I loved being able to help others and to serve others. I think that that's completely noble. But one of the things that I've learned over time now is that how you define something is between you and within you, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
ego and your spirit, right?
Yeah.
And trying to convince somebody else that your way is the best way is, it's hard to do. But where do we learn that from? We learn that from our own upbringing. And like I remember my mom saying things like, it's my way or the highway, so I'm like, oh well, I don't want the highway, so okay,
Yeah.
mom, whatever you say. And religion is very similar, because if you don't obey their rules, then somehow you're falling outside of what they're willing to accept, and you're falling outside of God's love for you.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, I lived my life that way for a very, very long time, and I really felt like my success in life was directly correlated between how I was conducting myself within the framework of what everyone else's definitions were of me. And I will say, look, like I still am working through some of those things. These are
Always.
lifelong, yeah,
Yeah.
these are lifelong things that, you feel like you've made some really good progress. And then you realize that, oh my gosh, like, okay, well, I'm still allowing some of that old programming to run in my experience, because perhaps, I might seek validation externally, instead of allowing people to just be themselves.
Yeah.
And so I put conditions on people. And I remember the very first time that I really began to question some of these things, for me personally. Again, like I was LDS for a very long time in my life, very, very active in day-to-day church activities. I would consider myself, if there was a label, to be somewhat of a Peter priesthood. And and ironically, I say that now, and I feel more worthy now than I've ever felt in my entire life,
Yes.
right? Not
Yes.
being affiliated with those things, but the definition of, when people who are, who may understand what that label is, being a Peter priesthood. This is one of those things where, I was going to church every single Sunday. I had all of the callings that you're supposed to get. I was, doing the home teaching, going to the temple every month, and running my family in a way that I felt was appropriate. And it's interesting, again, as you look back, like there's been moments where I've looked back with pain on some of the ways that I've treated people, especially the people that I love the most,
Hmm.
as a result of trying to tick all those boxes
Yeah.
and fulfill all those things. What was interesting is, my wife and I talk about it periodically, and how, and I do swear, so I apologize for anybody who's a little sensitive to swearing, but it's just me. I apologize, not necessarily for being me, but if you have an adverse reaction to it. But my wife would tell me, gosh, like there were moments where you were like a total dick. And I'm like, I know, I'm so sorry. Like I was trying to live someone else's definition, and like I was trying to force that on other people just so that I could feel better about me. And there was this wake of collateral damage of people were in my experience. And thank goodness they loved me beyond past those things. And they were great examples of unconditional love. But going back to like where things really started to shift for me was, I've always been very entrepreneurial. And when you come from nothing, and like you're trying to make something of yourself in the world, or within what people would deem as success, when I was younger, you could take a lot of risks, right? I think a lot of people say that when you're older, you have kids and mortgage and all these things, it becomes a lot more tenuous. And so I was young, and my family would tell me that you're young, take risks, because when you get older, here's a belief you should buy into. Um, but one quick thing I would say is every single day, the goal is just to be completely within you and to have that space within you, because there are no risks, right? Everything will always be magnificent once you allow it, right? But that's the thing. It's this allowing that we get in the way of, where ego wants to put a clamp down and put a label and put a box around what our experience is.
Well, it is
And
interesting because the risk that you're talking about, I mean, when you describe that experience, it is magnificent, because what you're really doing is you're stretching so many so many of those beliefs and that programming and things that you don't think are possible in your world, because you haven't been modeled that, you haven't been shown that necessarily at this point, right? So the risk is
right.
that expansion part of it, but it's always that power within that gets you to bridge that gap. So I love that you talk about the risk, because we don't they're perceived, like you said.
Yeah, all the risks are made up. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that the interesting thing is that like I was taught to fear a lot of things,
Yeah.
and fear is a very powerful motivator, because again, like I call this our meat suit, right? Like what I'm here presenting to you guys today is my meat suit,
Yeah.
but the key thing I look at is like, this experience that we have is like this, you have this ego side of you that's here to protect you,
Yeah.
against things like, saber-toothed tigers, which is no longer really a threat. But your mind can't perceive the difference between what's a real threat and what's a perceived threat.
Yeah.
And so it's going to react very similarly, if not identically. And so I think a lot of people can feel that they have tension, and some people call it anxiety. They have this tension that's built up inside of them, as if there's this imminent danger that they are in. And again, I would say, like, I'm aware of it now. I'm able to see it now in my own experience, only because I was able to take that step back, and kind of, again, going back to what shifted for me is, I was in this mode of being entrepreneurial and trying to be successful, and success is defined by other people, and I had a lot of really powerful successes, where by the time I was 25 years old, I was a multimillionaire. But what was interesting, what got me there, my very first experience was I was married once before, and I'm so grateful for my ex-wife. She's a wonderful person. At the time, I was obviously very hurt and devastated by a lot of these things that took place, and now I feel an immense sense of gratitude for her, because she chose to leave, and I felt like, the moment she told me she left, I remember her hanging up the phone on me, and me telling her, "But I love you," and she hangs up the phone, and I'm just driving in the car, actually on my way to go pick her up from the airport in Miami. We were going to go on a cruise and do some fun stuff back in the day, and she called me to tell me she excuse me, that she wanted a divorce. And I remember getting off that phone call, and having this immediate feeling of like gratitude and like freedom, and like, oh my gosh, this this is amazing, like, oh, thank you so much for leaving, because now I can go on with the rest of my life. And then immediately, like, my ego mind, my belief system kicked in
Yeah.
and said, hey, you can't feel this way. You got married in the LDS temple, like, marriages are supposed to be forever.
Yeah. This
And what do
defines
you
you
do?
somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're now going to be a failure, and you've got to get this right. You got to fix this. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I remember having like this internal dialogue, like, oh my gosh, like, you're totally right. I got to go fix this. And I immediately, like,
You're
I had this,
totally right.
yeah, you're totally right. Right? Yeah, but that's the programming, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, yeah, I'm supposed to do that stuff
Well,
so that other
the ego
people would
always
accept me.
wants to be right.
Yeah, ego always wants to be right. And,
Yeah.
and again, like, it's like, ego should be an ally for our experience.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, like, I've learned over the years, and I'm still working through these things, that sometimes I get upset with ego, but ego is what helps me provide the contrast, and actually helps me be aware of the way that I'm feeling.
Exactly.
And
It provides the
and
perfect picture of the gap that we have sometimes, or the
yeah, that's
perceived
a great
gap.
way of putting. Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. And what's interesting, again, coming back to that, is that when my ex-wife left me, and she left me for another guy, and so I have some funny jokes I say around that, but I'll spare that for later.
Well,
um
I do want you to stay here for a minute because I work with like 90% couples, and this part in your journey is so relevant to what so many people are going through. And the fact that we believe that love comes from love or validation or anything comes from our partner or our relationship. This is obviously the most intimate relationship aside from
yeah.
ourselves and whatever, you perceive as God. But this is a really pivotal moment for so many people, and an opportunity, I would say, to start to go within, because as kids, we've been programmed that love and validation comes from our parents, it comes from other people, and so we're constantly searching that. But then it's like, I'm gonna, most of us don't get it because our parents aren't, um they don't go within, and they're doing the same thing, and so they're searching without themselves. And so this intimate relationship and this part in your story is very relevant, I believe, in, like you say, the shift of really learning to go within. And I think so many people are going through this, whether they have physically or consciously looked at this or not. I still think people are subconsciously and internally still asking the question, why are they not feeling this love and this validation or something from their partner or the person that they're with, or this intimate relationship? And so, yeah, I definitely want you to stay here a little bit because I think it's very relevant.
Yeah, I would love to. Here's a couple of things I would share that
And the
I've
jokes are
learned.
great.
Yeah. So I've got a few. I've got a few. So my so when I got married before, like I remember I was 24 years old. I married a 19-year-old woman, and looking back on that, like I tried to force an outcome, right? I tried to tick a box of, I found somebody who I thought was a great person. She was a great person. And that we were great together. We had fun together. And to be candid, like nobody really told me what a great partner was
Yeah,
and how
good
to
point.
have
Yeah.
successful, intimate relationships. It was just, go find somebody who loves God and who will love you. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty straightforward. Okay, I'll go do that, right?
Yeah.
And
And then I'll be
and
loved in return, right?
and then I'll be loved in return. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, I would say that was like so devastating for me when things didn't work out, because I had done everything that was always ever asked of me. I had plenty of opportunities growing up in Miami to be what religions would call unchaste. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, like I'd never want to do that. Like I only want to be with somebody who's gonna, appreciate me and only want to be with me. And then I'm like, well, wait, when my ex-wife left me, I'm like, well, what just happened? It left me with a
Yeah.
lot of questions. and
Yeah.
and and again, like from somebody like who is very religious, what I would call, I think there's a difference between being religious versus being spiritual.
Absolutely.
And
And at the
the
time
thing
it
that
was religious.
yeah, at the time it was very religious. And what I realized in that moment was that, like, I felt very abandoned by of how I experienced the divine at that time in my life. And life did not turn out the way that I was promised it was going to turn out, even though I had
Exactly.
done exactly everything that people had told me I had to do to experience amazing outcomes.
Yeah, because your parents,
And
everyone gives you that roadmap, and you're like, well, here's how I'm going to be able to feel what it is that I'm really looking for and searching for. So yeah, I totally get that.
yeah, and again, so you're right. I mean, I think that like that roadmap that people who love you give you, you kind of take at face value. And there's so many things that I took at face value at that time. And going back to like couples who are perhaps looking for that deeper level of intimacy. Intimacy has nothing to do with anybody else but you, in my
Exactly.
experience. And one of the, I think, and this is what I always try and encourage people to do is, look, don't take my word for it. Just try it and see if it fits you, right? Because if trying to experience intimacy outside of you hasn't given you the connectedness that you've really wanted to feel, well, this is another way, and see if you can go within, because ultimately in going within, all that you and I could ever want to experience in life already exists within us.
Exactly.
We seek outside because that's what we're taught to do from a very young age, right? I mean, as
Yep.
a baby, you're solely relying on your mother to feed you, clean you, take care of you. I mean, it starts from infancy, right? And
Yep.
so the real awakening, I think, for people is when they say, you know what, like, I feel so disappointed all the time by my partner. And it's not your partner's fault. Your partner's just being themselves, right? So the real question
And
is,
sometimes the perfect mirror
right? And yeah,
all
very
the
much
time.
so the perfect mirror. Yeah, very
Yeah.
all the time.
Yes.
And and I don't believe couples give each other enough credit for being that perfect mirror.
Yeah, I agree.
And sometimes it's hard to hear what your partner is telling you, because what you really want to hear is like words of comfort and consolation, instead of, well, you brought this on yourself. I'm like, no, what?
Yeah.
Like, no, like, and then you end up, in some instances, perhaps resenting having shared with your partner, or feeling like you can be vulnerable with them.
Well,
And
looking in the mirror, I believe, is everyone's worst fear, right? So
yeah,
on some level, when they're mirroring back to you, you brought this on yourself, they're actually giving you the greatest gift, because they're giving you your power back, right? They're saying
yeah,
that I'm not in control of your world, or I'm not the I can't govern in your world. So what's you're experiencing is within you, and that's the greatest gift anyone could really give you, because now I actually have the power within myself to change the experience, or to experience what it is I'm wanting to experience. So that is the greatest gift, although we don't want to hear it.
right. I mean, that's, and I mean, like I said, our spouses are wonderful gifts, and I think that, like, one of the things that perhaps we could all be better at in our relationships is just honoring our spouse by honoring ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And it's always interesting, like when I talk with people, and I can you're interacting with them, with their significant others. Here they call them partners, and that's not referencing anything, but like who you're basically choosing to spend the rest of your life with. And I think it's different. Like in Europe, it's just a different, like, marriage is perceived a lot differently here. It's not like you can have like a lifelong partner and you're fully committed, but marriage, a piece of paper, as soon as you have it, it like changes the game, right? Again, that's just societal programming.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, going back to what you were saying about like that level of vulnerability and intimacy with people, is that, and this is one of the things that I had to learn, firsthand for myself, was that, my ex-wife, she didn't leave me because of me. And I remember, being in
Yeah.
my therapy. I went to therapy for like 3.5 years because I felt so conflicted with this outcome that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, my therapist basically telling me, he's like, Chris, like, with your ex-wife, did you ever hit her? I'm like, no, never. It's like, did you ever yell at her? I'm like, no, I never did that. He's like, did you ever call any names? I'm like, never to her face, It's always under my breath. And he's like, okay, so why do you think she really left? I'm like, I don't know, because if I knew, I would have changed, and I would have helped her stay. And he just said, he's like, Chris, no, 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 that's not the point, man. She didn't leave because of you, right? She left because of her,
Yeah.
right? Like, she wanted to go experience something different. Like, she was young, and she was, wanted to have, like, I would say what most people want to experience during that normal time of their lives, unless you're very indoctrinated into what, a particular religion or belief system is telling you should be doing during those formative years of your life. And so
Well, there's such a
so
searching that goes on, right? So,
right.
clearly, to our point is really when we start to go within, we start to find what it is we're looking for. But that's not the programming. That's not the norm. That's not the roadmap. And so clearly she is searching for something still within herself, and receiving, where she was at with you and what she had created with you may or may not have been where she was at in her journey. So yeah, to your
Yeah.
point, this was her journey. It had nothing to do with yours necessarily. We all create our own worlds, right?
We all have our own worlds. And again, like, when you go to sleep at night, the only thing you're really seeing is the back of your own eyelids,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you're going within anyway when you're going to sleep, in my belief. And
Yeah,
so what I think is
great point.
interesting, going to the intimacy component, like, I remember, going back with my therapist, like, it was really it was really eye-opening for me because, again, here it was, I was having this incredibly traumatic experience about life not working out the way that I had planned in something that was supposed to be a very joyful thing, like you're marrying somebody for forever. Like you're supposed to want to like them for a very long time. So why would you marry somebody and not want to like them for longer than, the year or so that we were together,
Well, and you thought you'd
or married?
arrived on some level, right? Because this was the ultimate
Absolutely. Yeah.
something. This is where
Yeah.
love and everything was going to come from. So yeah.
Yeah. So that was like my devastating thing. I remember like, these feelings of just, oh, dread, and, kind of trying to, every day I was sleeping like, gosh, maybe 12, 13, 14 hours a day. I'd work a little bit here and there. And throughout this process, like I just found myself letting go of what those preconceived ideas were, because I had to come back to a place where I could love myself first and then trust myself secondly.
Yeah.
And my therapist helped me a ton with that initial realization. As I told you, like there's obviously a lot more to my journey, but as there is with everyone. And my therapist, he shared with me a story that resonated with me. And I remember, I was piggybacking off of the whole thing I was just sharing about, did I ever do anything that would cause her to leave? And he shared with me a story where, that he's like, Chris, like, he said at this point I was I was living in New Mexico. I had a very big practice. It was a thriving family therapy practice down there. I was the bishop of the ward down there. And I remember, the mother of my 5 children, my lovely bride, waking up one morning and telling me that, Robert, John, I don't want to be a Mormon anymore, and I don't want to be married to a Mormon. So either you leave the church or I'm leaving you. And so this entire construct of his world was absolutely rocked, because here it was, to your point, like this person that you have this super intimate relationship with, and who you believe will have this into perpetuity, into eternity, if you will. Now
Or you
all of a
think you
sudden
do.
this that you think you do, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, it's like this person wants out, and if I don't join that ship, then oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like if everything's over. So like your idea of this world that you've created in your mind to allow you to feel good about you gets rocked. And so he told me, he said, Chris, like it was so devastating for me. And in the end, like we tried to work things out, and over time, like it just didn't work. And she ended up leaving. And I was devastated. I was really devastated. And he said, within 6 months of her leaving, Chris, I met and married the love of my life. And the last 13 years have been the most amazing and happy years of my life. And I'm starting to cry, like, oh, I'm like, Dr. John, this is a good story, man. And he said, he's like, Chris, like, my point is that, like, don't ever doubt what God's plan B is for you. In your mind, plan A was your ex-wife, right? Just wait to see what happens with plan B. And what we'll do right now is we're going to spend some time just helping you fall back in love with you. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. And so it became like this journey back to where I could feel very positive about who I am. Now, granted, like I had some severe struggles with being able to trust myself again, not trust my current, my wife now. Like I'm super in love. We've been in love. I've been in love, at least. I can't speak for her, I guess, but I've been in love since the day that I met her.
Yeah.
And it's been over 12 years now, and we have an amazing life together. But the thing that I would contribute to that amazing life together, it's not to say that we don't have our struggles, that we don't have things that happen to us, but one of the things that I've been a big proponent of is, basically, if you or I can get to a place where we love ourselves unconditionally, then we have no conditions that we place on others for them to feel our love either.
Yeah, because everything's a
And
projection. So we're
right.
always going, whatever, lack we feel inside, whatever expectations we have on ourselves, whatever judgment we have, we're going to project that onto everyone in our outside world as well, so that we can see that. So I totally agree. I want to go back to the part where you talked about the plan B. And I feel like there's a real parallel to returning back to ourselves that happens in everyone's world. I dare say that I can say everyone, that there's always going to be this, no matter how much we're taught to express and do and do and do, and to follow that roadmap and to prove ourselves in order to get value or to get something from somebody else. And ultimately, we're talking about power in so many ways, because at that time, I feel like, those 2.5 years, really what you were doing was returning back to yourself. And I feel like this happens, or everyone has the opportunity at some point in their life where there's that rubber band effect to say, hey, you've been expressing, or you've been getting far out from the INSCAPE, far out from yourself, and you've created this gap, and we have to come back. We have to come back home. We have to return to the source that is within us, the power that's within us. And I love that you even said, at this point in your life, you feel more worthy, more valuable, actually more powerful than you've ever felt inside of yourself. And that return and this point in your journey was something that you bravely and vulnerably moved into. And sometimes we think that the outside circumstances are forcing us to do that, but at the end of the day, you still had the choice. You had the choice to either resist that and to continue to search outside of yourself, right? I could say that it's possible that her journey maybe didn't look the same, and maybe it looked longer, and because she moved into another relationship quickly and searched possibly in that relationship, her rubber band effect and her return home, who knows what that looks like. But you did the work to move inside of yourself, and that plan B is, to me, another word for that return, back home. And I feel like everyone's going to get that opportunity at some point in their life, whether we choose to do it or not, or have the tools to do it, or the understanding. I won't say, for everyone, but I do think that that's how it's designed, is because what we're really looking for is that power within, and to love ourselves and to create intimacy within ourselves, because we really don't have it to share unless we know ourselves. We just continue to ask the other person to give us something and give our power away to somebody else, hoping that we're going to get it from somebody else. So I love this part in your journey. I love the plan B, because really it's really the only plan, in my opinion, that works. And that is that return that you're talking about. It really doesn't even have anything to do with John's new relationship necessarily, but that he got the opportunity to clearly find something that aligned and resonated with him in a way that he lined up with. So that plan B, would you agree that that's what you did?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that as I mentioned earlier, I think it has to do with whether or not you are allowing things in your life.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people live life from their mind, and your mind only knows the past.
Yeah.
And the information that's been put into it. And that's the difficulty, is that when you're living, moment to moment from your mind, I mean, you can feel like you can feel it, because you feel exhausted. You can just think about the different emotions. When you're coming from a place of spirit, you're energized.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, when you're experiencing life day to day from your mind, it's one of those things where, where I share with people that who I get to have these kinds of conversations with. They're not that many, so it's always fun to talk about it. But so often, like, our plan A's, to your point, are what programming that has been put into our minds, that we've allowed to be our belief system, and have taken it face value. And I did that for a lot of different things. And it's interesting, I had a friend of mine. Just a quick side story. I had a friend of mine. We were playing golf, I think, in Scottsdale a few years back, and he was asking me. He was like, "Chris, like, what do you think's allowed you to experience the level of success that you experience in your life today?" And I'm like, "Well, I would say, like, for me personally, it would have to be when I let go of all of the limiting beliefs that I had." Because, again, like, your mind can only know the past, whereas spirit knows all things, past, present, future, right? Because it exists in the present. And the
Exactly.
present is the future. So anyhow, So every moment you're experiencing is the present, and there's like a whole discussion around what is the future anyway.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah. So I think that like the key thing is that when you just step away from trying to follow a script of what your life should be and allow life to come to you, then you're no longer having to swim upstream and exert yourself and go through this. I mean, it's exhausting. Like, when people come and talk to me about their problems, I'm like, so what are you gonna do? I'll ask them, what are you gonna do? Well, I don't know. I'm like, well, I think you do know,
Yeah.
right? But you won't allow yourself to go there, because they're miserable in their current circumstances. And then, and then finally, there's so much pain that builds up that they force this massive blow up scenario that never had to get there to begin with,
Well, and isn't it
right?
interesting because you're talking about the limitations, which I love. I love that we're going into that because again, those are always in your mind. So that those limiting beliefs of feeling like and that exhaustion that you're talking about and that blow up that you're talking, the pain is always to guide us within, right? It's that journey from our head to our heart to really learn how to trust and to feel that power. It's not exhausting because really when we go within, I mean, I think it's been measured. I can't fully quote it, but I think our heart and our energy source inside of ourselves is like 5,000 times more powerful than our head, right? So the pain is just that whole disconnect from trying to get all this energy and power within our head and our programming, and it is so limiting because we don't have any power really in our heads, right? They're just a story. Our brains are not actually wired to actually create the energy that we're really talking about within. And it is so limiting because we're trying to be powerful in our head when that's not where power comes from.
Yeah, power does not come from that. And it, look, I mean, I think that this is my experience. And this is, again, what I encourage everyone to do is, try things out, right? And for me, it was removing a lot of or unwinding, I should say, a lot of the beliefs that I had held that were very limiting. And one of
Yeah.
those big beliefs for me was around religion, that God would only love me and bless me if I was fulfilling these list of requirements.
Yeah.
And I remember, they used to let me teach Sunday school before I used to go to church. And um, and I remember I was teaching 13, 14-year-old kids, and I remember asking them, who does Heavenly Father love more? Does he love a black person or a white person more? And they're like, oh, no, no, Brother Scanlon, he loves everybody the same. I'm like, okay, I like that answer. Who does he like? Who does he love more? A man or a woman? No, 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 everybody the same. And then I asked him, who does he love more, a Muslim or a Mormon? And the kids were like blown away. They're like, well, shouldn't it be the same? And I told them, like, look, that answer is for you to figure out, but you have to go within to get that answer.
Yeah.
And I think that once people begin to, at least for me, as I shared, is that like it was a very big departure for me because I was the embodiment of what you should be, right, as a spiritual giant in the LDS faith. And as I started to depart from all those things, it was very scary for my wife at first. She thought that I was going to all of a sudden, go out and think that it was okay to do whatever I wanted to do and not have any limits or expectations on our relationship anymore, and just go with the flow of whatever
Yeah,
I
that
felt was
box
okay in
that
the
box
moment.
keeps us safe, right?
Supposedly,
Perceived.
and so I told my wife, I'm like, listen, I have no desire to be with anybody else. Like I feel like everybody has their own flavor of crazy, and I really enjoy your flavor of crazy. It matches with my flavor of crazy.
I
So,
love it.
yeah, we all have our little idiosyncrasies, but I think like for her, it was just a very scary thing that what we had identified with as a couple and what she was feeling very safe with, I was now making a complete departure from. And my departure wasn't like, oh my gosh, like I completely disown the church or disavow any of those things. I don't feel that way at all. I'm so grateful for the wonderful people that I met there, the sense of community that I had there. And then, like I said, there's many wonderful things that I was able to learn that have helped me even now in my spiritual journey, to be able to connect within and identify some of those feelings that I feel
But you
as I
understand them on a
continue.
much deeper level now.
Much deeper, because
Yeah.
it's I no longer have this restriction. And again, as I was saying, like, I started this one company called AU Card about 8 or 9 years ago now, and we have a patent on this, solid gold, basically solid gold debit card or credit card, and it's fully customizable. It's very much, a personal expression of the individual. And we had signed up somebody from the Middle East, and I was flying over to Dubai to meet with them. And I was really enjoying the experience of getting to know this guy. We had gone to dinner at this restaurant in downtown Dubai called Le Petit Maison. Great pork chops if you ever go there. And I remember like him telling me this story about his family and just his life in general. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how are you so blessed? Like, you don't even believe in Jesus, like, this is so
I love
weird
it.
to me, because of the things that he had aspired for in his life, like, were the same things that I did. And yet we had very different ways of experiencing spirituality, right? The connectedness with the divine. And, he was dressed in the traditional, like the long white gowns that they wear and whatnot. And I remember just walking away from that experience feeling like very confused. Like, how is he so blessed with all of these different things? And yet, I aspire for a lot of these same things and are experiencing these same things. And I'm taught that I can only have those things if I do X, Y, or Z, right?
And
And
I just want to interject really fast, because at that moment, you say confused. And I could also say that you asked a question, a really powerful question, right?
yeah,
To really say, you know, how come in my programming it says that it's supposed to look this way, right? And that's part of what I believe is part of your success, is that you really ask the question worldwide, right? I mean, you asked universally, collectively, is this all the same on some level? And so if that's the case, then that's part of the limiting beliefs that I think you work through, because in business and relationships, no matter what, you have received relationships and connections around the world. And that was so pivotal for you to be able to say, is love universal? Is value universal? Is spirituality universal? What is it that, so you asked a very big question there. So that confusion is, I think it's relevant to talk about. Sometimes when we feel confused, it's that question of, I'm on the brink of moving through a limitation, because the question's still coming in the mind. And really it's that journey back in and within to be able to say, I think I'm going to find the answer if I'm willing and vulnerable enough to go within to ask this question. So that was a big question, wouldn't you say, at that moment?
yeah, I mean, it was a big question, because I had like some, I would say, questions about it before, and I had
Yeah.
swept those under the rug.
Yeah.
And because I didn't want to rock the boat, and I was really enjoying the space that I had created in that other framework of belief.
Yeah.
And
I felt safe there.
yeah, it was a safe spot. And one of the things, and I would say this. I mean, the spiritual journey, it's once you've kind of awoken to it, I would say that it's so wonderful, but there's no going back. I mean, there's
Yeah.
like, I think about like the Matrix, about how I can't remember that one guy who wanted to just be put back into the Matrix. Just put me back in. I don't
Yeah.
want all this responsibility.
Yeah.
And when you kind of understand how people really work, it's because you understand yourself. And people, there are many people have asked me, like, what are some of the things that have contributed to your successes? And I tell them, like, look, like, first and foremost, you have to have integrity, and integrity isn't a function of, being honest with people. That's definitely
Yeah.
part of it, but it's being honest with yourself, because when you're honest with yourself, the only thing that you can be honest with other, or that you can't be with other people, is honest.
Yeah.
And
Transparent too.
so, right. And so to me, that's the key thing, because, again, like, if I'm creating a space for me to be myself, now I can create a space for you to be yourself.
Yeah.
And you go back to, relationships and what the power of intimate relationships really equates to. And, my wife and I talk about this a lot. Like one of our biggest disagreements that we have almost on a daily basis is, what are we going to do for dinner? Right. So like, I
You're
like to
doing
order
well if that's
in.
your biggest disagreement.
Right. Well, I mean, because we've kind of put everything else to the side. We've kind of said, look, all these other things, we can put a meaning on them. We can say that these are going to be things that we're going to get mad at each other about. And when we were first married, like I said, I had some really good successes. And like when we were first married, like I remember giving her a budget, and saying, this is all you can spend every single month, which she never upheld. And she wasn't even buying stuff really for herself. She was just buying stuff for our home and for the family. I'm like, we don't need all this stuff. And she's like, oh, but it's just, it's stuff that really will make us feel more comfortable. And she was just wanting to be a contributor to our experience. And I was basically saying, I'm going to put limits on you, and I'm going to say, this is the only way that you can do this.
Yeah.
And again, like I've been going through this, what I would call a spiritual awakening now for myself for about 7+ years. And one of the things that's been really helpful for me with my relationship with my wife, as I mentioned, is that like once I was able to start to love myself unconditionally, to do so on a more frequent basis, I was able to do the same for her. And I created a space for us so that she could be herself. And there was no what I would call consequence for her not being herself, so that she didn't have to fit some other mold. And I think that a lot of us we feel like we have to be something that we are not, or someone that we are not, in order to get what we want out of it. And
Yeah.
I made this deal in my relationship with my wife, was that, look, I'll create the space for you to do whatever you want to do. Like, obviously I'm not very big on infidelity. So if you want to go somewhere else, that's totally fine. You can, just let me know ahead of time.
I've been there
And
before. I'll be fine.
right. Yeah. I've been there before, I'll be fine, but just tell me in advance, so that there's nothing that takes you out of integrity either. And, and I'll do the same with you. And she's like, well, I'll never do that. And I remember us when we were first talking about, this expectation we were going to have on ourselves in this new relationship, as I was beginning to experience my world differently, and my beliefs were changing, that this was how we were gonna interact with each other. And as a result, we created a really safe place for both of us. And it allows us to be vulnerable. It allows us to just kick back and be who we are. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to create that space, especially when they feel they have so much expectations externally that they feel beholden to, that they've given their power to, and said, okay, I can only feel good about this situation when I meet these requirements, right?
Well, and so much of that is coming from a place, because if you're not going within, if you're not looking at what it is that you're really wanting, we show up in our relationship, those expectations always come with a this need, that, or this lack within ourselves. And so we're usually pulling at our partner, or in our relationship, inside and outside of our intimate relationship. It happens everywhere. We show up in a place of need or lack. And instinctually, I believe that people pull away from that, and there's a lot of defenses to that, because I think on some level, we all know that we do have our own world, and that's what we're looking for. And so this return that we're really looking for, when we're looking to pull from somebody else, that's where the expectation, that judgment comes, because we believe that they're supposed to give us something, right? They're supposed to give us something that's within. But it creates this disconnect, because we don't move into each other. We're really pulling away from each other, because we're really trying to find what it is that is within. So I love the word expectation, because or judgment, right? Because ultimately that's what's disconnecting us from that space of love that we're really wanting to connect in. We can't really meet each other and move into the relationship when we're pulling at each other to get something. And that's where that expectation comes in. So I love that you're bringing that up, because there's not a space of love and safety that we end up creating if we're expecting somebody to give us something that we already have.
Right. I mean, and I think that those are the shifts that begin to happen to people when they allow themselves to experience something different.
Yeah.
And I will say this, I mean, you know, for anyone who's listening to this, I think that the key thing is always communicating those expectations that you have, and being aware and being open to perhaps that your partner may not want to have that expectation on them. And perhaps they can also help you reconcile why you feel that's a must have for the
Yeah.
relationship you want to experience. But you know, ultimately I think it is just creating that space for yourself to be you, and that there's nothing wrong. Like if you like peanut butter and jelly versus peanut butter and strawberry jam, who cares? That's okay. And you know, I believe, look, I believe that the universe is perfect positivity, right? There's, we think in our minds that these bad things happen to us, right? And you know, expectations aren't met, we have disappointments, we have frustrations, there's things that don't seem to make sense in our minds. But I've always looked at it, and again, I still experience things like that on a pretty frequent basis. And as those things come up, it's always, you know, that reminder of, oh my gosh, okay, I still have this limiting belief around this, that I've given my power to something else, and now ego is running that programming to try and protect me from something that's, there's really no threat. There's
Yeah.
no threat. Your partner, in who you choose to go on this journey with, maybe it's now, and is only going to last for a while, or maybe it lasts for the rest of your life, or whatever that time frame is with the person you're with today. They're a perfect fit and a perfect mirror for what you are and where you want to go. And we can experience anything we want to experience in this life. And you know, I remember, you know, I have like this life coach that I work with on a weekly basis, and really early on in our discussions, you know, he had asked me a question. He's like, you know, Chris, what's the difference between you and a billionaire? I'm like, I don't know, a couple more zeros or something, you know, in his net worth or whatever. He's like, yes, true, but you know, it's the difference between you and a billionaire is what he believes is possible versus what you believe is possible. And you can have it all. Like if you want to have an amazing relationship with your spouse or partner, or work, you know, from a work perspective, you want to have an amazing business or anything that you want to do, you can have it all. There's no restriction except what you give power to in your mind as that limitation or restriction.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are, you know, they get tripped up then, because it's okay, I do want to experience it all, right? That sounds really good. And
Right.
then it's okay, well, how do I do it? And the one thing I would just share really, really quickly is that we aren't responsible for the how, right? We're just responsible for going within and feeling that experience. And then everything else manifests on its own. And going back to some of my programming, like growing up, like my dad telling me I had to like be like, you know, a super hard worker to get ahead in life. I feel like if it's not going to be me doing all the work, then who's going to do it? And it's taken me a long time to kind of get past that, to realize that this life can be very, very enjoyable, right? We just have to allow it. And so often we get in the way of it by saying, no, it can't look like that, or it can't be like that. And as a result of that, we put limitations on the flow of things that can come into our experience that we really want to experience.
What would you say about, as far as the how goes, what would you say about receiving and what that really means? Because again, I think that a lot of people in their minds can still think things are possible, but when it really comes down to it, there and this is something that I'm very familiar with energy work, and we've shared different experiences together, and something that I've really noticed or witnessed with you is um, you have mastered something as the embodiment of feeling something inside of yourself. And so the receiving part of it, I feel like, is a key part that not a lot of people understand, that when we're looking to find our worth and to find our value and to be love, or to embody something, it's not just that I know it's possible, and a lot of people work from their mind in that, from their brains in that. They're like, well, yeah, I really believe that's possible, but I feel like the biggest gap that people have is, can they feel the receiving? And when I say receiving, it's the energy of being able to feel that power. Like, how much can you feel and embody inside of yourself? Because if you don't have the space within, then a lot of times that's where we reject things or we're pushing things away. And you've received so much in your world, I would say. And again, that measurable is relative to everyone. But I
Yeah.
do think it's important to realize that there is this connection for you that I don't think people realize there, that within themselves, how much energy and how much value are we willing to feel and not reject or not push away. Again, even if you know it's possible, how much are you willing to feel within yourself? And can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I think you know what I'm talking about when
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
say, like when you think about a possibility. I've watched you do it. You go, you think about a possibility, or you have a thought, or you have a question that you're asking, or you're expanding in some way within your imagination. And then I've watched you go, like, literally within your body to find space and to line up with this, even energetically. When I say energetically, I'm talking about emotionally as well. So how much can I feel is a really big part of the how of 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 really being able to line up with abundance, right? Not lack within, and to really allow yourself to feel. What would you say to that?
So lack only exists in the mind. It doesn't
Yep.
exist within your spirit. Your spirit is full of everything that you ever want. And I appreciate what you said though, as far as like going within and experiencing the emotion. People will say, well, like, I want to have my own plane. I want to have, all these different things that exist outside of you, which are great. I mean, everybody, I remember there was this one thing that Jim Carrey has said, that he wished that everybody would experience phenomenal worldly success, because they could realize just how empty it is, right? That the only real connection that you and I really have is what's connecting us inside,
Yeah.
right? Like if we're connected to ourselves within, then you can create whatever you want to experience in this life, and it'll manifest in ways, going back to plan B, it'll manifest in ways that you and I never even contemplated were possible to arrive in our
Yeah.
experience, and somehow they've shown up, right? So that's
Yeah.
what's so cool. And what I share with people is that it is an emotional experience, because at the end of the day, like, we are beings of energy,
Yeah.
right? So when you think about, if you're having a lot of negative thoughts and you're feeling down and depressed, you know what is your primary thought that you're having in that moment that is perpetuating you to feel that way, right? And then you realize, oh my gosh, like my brain is telling me I need to feel this way because of this circumstance, and this belief that I have around this circumstance. I don't I've chosen to not feel worthy, and as a result of that, I'm choosing to feel depressed or upset or whatever the case may be.
I'm choosing to label the energy that I'm feeling, more importantly,
Right.
right? I
And so,
I love that you brought up. I love that you brought the plane. I remember you were speaking at one of my seminars one time, and someone had mentioned, I believe it's possible for me to have my own plane. And so it goes back to that in my brain and in my head, I can line up with really a lot of possibilities. But the thing that you did so eloquently was, you walked them through what it felt like to pay for the gas, right? What all the things that it takes to line up with what, again, something perceived as big as that, right? As success as that is to really feel what it is to line up with those possibilities. There's always that gap that people don't understand, again, within your head to your heart. And it's something that, again, I think that you've mastered so beautifully, of what does it feel like, what do all the conversations feel like to line up with having that plane? What does it feel like to, what does your day to day feel like to line that up with that much abundance in your world? And so I feel like that's something that, again, you do so well, is there's a whole lining up with something inside of yourself in order to be able to line up with something outside of yourself.
yeah, so the way that I describe that, and it's very kind of you to say, Tanya, thank you so much. The 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 main thing is because we're beings of energy. Like if you think about, and I'm saying things, so just pay attention to the words that I use. Is that when you think about something that you want to experience, normally it's something outside of what your current experience is. So you really have no frame of reference for it. right? So what is it that you're really striving to feel? And I think
Nice.
that you have to distill it down to what it is you really want to feel. And a lot of times people just want to feel safe. They want to feel abundant. They want to feel peace. They want to feel freedom. And none of those things come from having anything.
Yeah.
And uh, what I try and share with people is that if you feel like in the having of something, you will feel that way, perhaps the universe will deliver that, or God will deliver that for you, and you'll realize just how empty that was. Going back to what Jim Carrey was saying,
Yeah.
right? The having of things doesn't solve for what you're ultimately trying to experience, and that experience that you want is a feeling. And so what I try and focus on for myself, this is, again, this is one way of trying to experience this life, is going in and feeling what is it that I really want to feel. And then how does all of that manifest? And if I want to have a big bank account, for example, okay, but why do
Yeah.
I really want a big bank account? Or what is it that I'm trying to solve for as a result of it, and not making any of it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because again, like, this is the programming that you have that's helped you get to this point in life, to where you're now awakened to an easier, perhaps more fluid way of experiencing everything you could have hoped for, and a whole bunch more. It is an energetic experience. So like, what I do is I tell people, like, if you are trying to project what you want onto the world, it can't come from here. This
Yeah.
does not work, you know,
No.
because it only knows the past, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to come from down deep. And for me, I always feel like that area is like, right above my belly and right below my chest.
Yeah.
And just that area right there, where I feel like that's where my power is, for me, like within. And I can feel that part of me. And when I go in and I feel peace, and I feel, safe, or I feel abundance, and I feel joy, then I start imagining, what do I want my being choice to be? I've now figured out the feeling that I really want to feel. Okay, well, what's my being choice around that? Right. And I'll make being choices, and people, they're I am statements, right? Typically for me. And those I am statements can vary from anything. Like, this morning in my meditation, it was, I'm an amazing father to my children. I'm an amazing husband for my wife. Right. And I'm not putting limitations around what that looks like. I'm just trying to align with the feelings that I want to
Yeah. What
experience.
does that feel like?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, so again, like, in bringing those things to your conscious mind will automatically gravitate pure positivity, which is perfect positivity of the universe, to your reality, right? And it will deliver a phenomenal experience for you. And
The thing
so
that I
that's
noticed,
how I create.
I love that. And the thing that I notice the most is, um, our egos do always want to be right? Because that's what keeps us safe. That's what we think we're in control. And so when you go to that being feeling, the incredible power of doing that, I wouldn't even say first, but being willing and vulnerable enough to go to, what does it feel like to be an amazing dad and a husband, and what does that feel like? And then what happens is we're able to connect the mind to that, right? Because then it finds evidence of that feeling. It says, oh well, when I'm present and when I'm open, and when I, all of these, we get the evidence, we get the answers, the interpretation of that feeling. But it is something that if we're willing to go to that feeling first, we can build upon that feeling and find so much evidence of that. Where if we go to our heads, a lot of times we're trying to search for that feeling, and because we don't believe we've experienced that, or we don't believe we already have that, we believe that we're in lack somehow. It's really difficult at times to get there, to that abundant, powerful feeling inside, because we're doing it backwards in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well, because I think, and it's perfectly said, Tanya. I mean, I think that, like, one of the things that I know I get tripped up on, and I'm just, sharing this as far as my own experience, is that
Yeah.
I will predefine what I want that outcome to look like, as opposed to allowing my silent partner, which has infinite power, to
Nice.
deliver it for me in the most amazing of ways. And
Nice.
so my ability, going back to what you asked before about, is, to receive, my ability to receive that from my silent partner, that's what lives within, is sometimes contingent, unfortunately, on what I want to perceive it here as
Yeah.
okay, once this is manifested out here and my brain can see it, then I will say it's been delivered.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, well, maybe it's coming in a variety of different ways that I had never before anticipated. And one of the things that I do share with people about particularly my journey is that I never thought I was going to get married again, and I thought I was completely done with having meaningful relationships. And I remember I was dating this one girl one time who was a phenomenal human being, and I mean just an amazing person. And I remember she was just feeling so frustrated because of my unwillingness to commit. And I told her, I was like, look, right now my heart just has a for lease sign on it, not a for sale. So like I really can't sign on for anything long term right here. And I was just scared. I was really scared. And I remember, when I met my current wife, like all that fear was gone because I had worked through a lot of these things already, but I was anticipating, like I said, never getting married again. I had never had put an expectation on it. So when it showed up in my experience, it was truly magnificent. And I think that's one of the things where, again, even now I still get tripped up on it because I'll say, oh, well, I'm feeling some perceived threat from over here. And I want that perceived threat to go away because it feels a little painful. Right. And so I'll say, okay, well, the only way that I said, the thing I can think about, the way for that perceived threat to go away, it looks like this. Okay, universe. All right, let's go into the feeling. All right, make it look like this. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, there is a much better way of doing that. And I know that early on in my what I would call understanding of my power to create, I would become continuously disappointed because I was going off of the programming in my mind of what that had to look like in order for me to feel validated in my power as a creator. And so each of us are incredibly powerful creators. And I
Yeah.
do think it's important to recognize that the life that you have is something that you created yourself. And if there's something that doesn't align with you anymore, there's nothing wrong with it. That's okay. You can say no to that now and you can
I love
create something else in its place.
I remember you saying that God always answers yes, right? That's
Yeah.
that pure positive energy. And people who are prayerful, people who are asking to create, people who are partnering with the divine, they're asking something in their mind. So back to your story of, I didn't in my mind, I wasn't going to be married. So I was, in my words, I was saying that my heart was for lease. But the truth always comes in what we're really saying in energy, what we're really saying in our hearts. And so we may be saying that we're praying for something, or we may be saying something in our words, but if they don't really match what you're really saying energetically, right? Obviously, you were open to experiencing connection and intimacy again. Otherwise, we know that your beautiful wife wouldn't have showed up in your experience, right? And so it's interesting because that's the danger sometimes of living from the mind, is we think that we're keeping ourselves safe for the ego and we're saying one thing, but in all reality, what are we really saying, right? What is our energy really saying? And clearly you were calling that in. And that's the valuable part of knowing the truth of what it is that we're really actually saying, um, through our hearts, through the soul, through our, through that connection of our energy. And it's interesting when it doesn't match with the words that we're saying, and that happens a lot. It happens in a lot of relationships. It happens to ourselves. We're constantly trying to tell a story around something, and we're not really paying attention. That's where meditation comes in. That's where a lot of things come in, because we're not really paying attention to what we're really asking or what we're really saying and the truth of what we're really saying. So, I mean, clearly you were not connected to what it is that you were really wanting, right? That's the defense that we have. What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, and I think that, was I open to receiving my wife at the in that moment of my life? I think what I was open to was just trusting myself again. Had nothing to
Okay,
do
I
with
love
my
that.
wife. It's just that that person showed up and we happened to be like so aligned and wanted similar things that, and I remember like early on when we were, and we've talked about this a lot over the years, is that she had been married once before as well. And, her parents had told her to marry her best friend. So what did she do? She went and married her best friend and realized that there wasn't this deep connection that she was looking for. Like it was a great relationship, and the guy was a great guy, very honorable, great human being, and took great care of her.
Probably not
And
enough contrast for her.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't know.
she
You know,
she
so
she probably wanted to actually grow.
yeah. And I think that, again, like the universe will deliver whatever it is you want to experience. And that's why I do say, like, God always answers your prayers, yes.
Yeah.
And people sometimes get scared about that because, like, oh, I don't want anything bad to happen to me. Like, well, that's not the way the universe works,
Yeah.
right? Nothing bad will ever happen to you unless you want it to, right? Like if you want to be from a and I tell people as well that, like, the place that I start from when I look at, like, decision making, and people ask, well, how do you go about your day-to-day decision making process? And I tell them, look, for me, it's really simple. It's just a quick litmus test. Am I coming from a place of fear, or am I coming from a place of love?
Nice.
And I remember, early on when I was dating my now wife, I had had a lot of spiritual awakenings. I still wasn't where I'm. It's been a journey. It's been a progression for sure.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, there was a moment in our relationship where I was scared, but I wanted to make that fear about some of her past choices, and it had nothing to do with her past choices. It was me asking myself, like, am I willing to trust myself still, because this is absolutely heading, towards a major commitment. And I remember, just being really honest with myself, going back to integrity and saying, okay, am I coming from this place of fear, or am I coming from love? And I was coming from a place of fear. And similarly, I think that we all have these experiences on a day-to-day basis where we're trying to make decisions all the time. And
I think we make 30,000 a day. I don't think people know that.
really, I haven't
Yeah.
counted. I just know there's a lot,
I don't really know who put the number to that, or who even possibly could be present long enough to count that. But I heard that somewhere. I
Yeah.
just don't think we realize that our power to create comes in, like, the fact that we have so many choices. There just so many of them are subconscious. We don't stay present long enough to know that we have that many choices.
Right. Probably. I mean, I don't know the number either, but I
Yeah.
think that, the litmus test, like I said, the litmus test, I think for me, that's really worked well, has just been being honest with myself on, am I coming from a place of fear, even of how I respond. Like, when my children ask me questions about things, or when my children are doing things that I think are absolutely crazy, I remember feeling like, even growing up, like, my parents would discount the things that I was doing all the time. And so, like, this feeling of not being worthy for my parents' love, and could only happen in a way that that they felt was safe for them. I don't want to create that for my children, right?
Yeah.
So I've lived that and experienced that. So, okay, I see my kids doing something I don't agree with. How am I responding, right? And how am I helping them, to experience that space of unconditional love for themselves similarly? But am I coming from a place of fear, or from this place of love? And when you come from a place of love, all things are possible.
Yeah.
All the goodness is possible. And when you come from a place of fear, it's only what's in your mind are you saving yourself from. And again, like, where your focus is where you're going to go. So focus on the positive things, focus on love. And then a lot of things will shift pretty quickly for people. I know they do for me.
Really fast, I'm just going to ask you. I know you got to go, and I want to respect your time. I find that so many people get what it is they believe is going to make them feel something, right? Something, they've gotten the success, they have the relationship, they have all these outside external things. I just want to ask you, like, how would you describe fulfillment for you? And is that possible all along the journey, and what does it mean to feel successful in your world, and fulfillment itself? What's the difference in that and success in a lot of people's minds?
So, somebody asked me one time, that's a great question. So somebody asked me one time, like, do you set goals for yourself? And I said, no. And they're like, well, why? Like, don't you know what you're shooting for? And I said, well, I already know where I'm going. I mean, like, I think that, like, if you think from a scriptural perspective, like, consider the lilies of the field. Like, the lilies of the field, they're beautiful just by themselves. You and I we're all lilies of the field, right? And so, when you think about fulfillment is like this searching outside of yourself for something. I want to feel fulfilled, but at the end of the day, we already are fulfilled. We
Nice.
already are all that we can ever be, because we are spirit. We're eternal beings, and nothing will ever change that. Now the experience is how does your mind process that? And feeling fulfilled for me, you know, you can think about all the accolades and like all the things that people can achieve, whether it's, you know, possessions or relationships or any of these other things. And at the end of the day, like, I think that, again, like those are the things that the world would tell you, or that other people would tell you, are signs of, hey, wow, that person has figured it out. And what most people, I don't think that is very common knowledge, is that it's almost like the Wizard of Oz. Like there's the guy behind the curtain is a miserable old man. You know,
Yeah.
he's not like this happy person that's here to bring joy to people.
Yeah.
And that's the same with a lot of really wealthy people. They've been able to achieve all these amazing things, as the world would put it, and they find out that, my gosh, like this is empty. And what I think is so telling, and again, like I look at the Bible and these different scriptural records around the world, and these are just guidebooks that our ancestors are trying to give us and tell us, like, if you want to live a great life, here are the things to think about, right? Here are the things to consider. And one of those things that they say is like, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and then all things will be added unto you. Right. So if you think about, where is the kingdom of heaven, it doesn't exist in some
Exactly.
far off planet, doesn't exist up in the sky. It's inside of you, it's inside of me, it's inside of every single person. It's already there.
Yep.
And that feeling of, you know, fulfillment, like I said, is that I think that for me, the way that I experience that, to answer your question, is it's more of a function of how connected am I right now. And the moments where, again, like every single day, I do disconnect, right? If I was constantly in spirit, I probably wouldn't even be on this planet anymore. You
There
know
you
what I'm
go.
saying?
Yeah.
But I, you know, I struggle with a lot of with a lot of the same things everybody does, and I have, you know, my own disappointments and things that I'm working through. I have a different way of approaching it. I have a different experience with it now, to where I don't put as many labels on things, and I have a different belief system around what they mean. So the measure of fulfillment for me is the measure of how connected I'm able to stay in spirit and being within myself, because then I'm always coming from the most powerful emotions that we can experience in this life, which are love and gratitude.
Absolutely.
Those two things will take you to whatever external things you want to experience. Love and gratitude will get you there, but by feeling them first within.
Totally agree. I love that. And it's really the message of everything that I do, because the Inscape is all about being able to go within to create and to experience all of that expansion. I like the analogy, because it's talking about being able to create a landscape, you know, and so inside of ourselves, whatever is outside of ourselves, you know, we could take the entire universe. That's also within ourselves. It's that receiving and that returning back to ourselves, that connection that you talk about. When we want to feel connected to God, when we want to feel connected to the universe, when we want to feel powerful, when we want to feel peace, all the things that we want to feel, really being able to return back to that inner landscape of ourselves is really where fulfillment is. I agree with you. And so many times we get so far out of ourselves that that emptiness or that hollowness that you talk about is that feeling of returning back to where that source really is. I'm going to ask you this. This will be my final question, I promise. Your hack to life. I think you've given us so many things already and so many keys to this. If you were to give someone, they wanted to know, you know, what is the shortcut? What is the hack? You know, how did you, you know, you have the most beautiful story of coming from what is perceived as nothing on the outside and as the external, to getting to a place where you are connecting, deeply connecting, and experiencing life with people who have also received a lot of abundance and a lot of power in their lives, and there's not a lot of limitations with the similar experience, the alignment that you have in business and in life. So what would you say? I mean, that there's been a long journey to that, and I say long, and that's very relative. You're young, right? So what is the hack to that? What would you say if you could give it somebody a key? What would that be? And I think we've hit a lot of it, but I want you to just kind of talk about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you know, it's a fun
Are there
question to
any
answer.
shortcuts?
I think that it's about perspective, and the one thing that I feel is super pertinent for people to know and feel and understand is that, you know, find joy in the journey, not the destination. The destination you'll get there no matter what. But
It's
are you
always moving
finding
too.
joy? Yeah. And that's the other thing is perfection is an illusion. And I
Yeah.
remember, the first time I had made $1 million, I, I, I was like, okay, like I did it. Now
Now
what?
what?
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, it was like this real like cricket moment for me. I call it like crickets, where there's, you achieve this big milestone that everybody tells you is like this big deal and big ordeal. And you're just sitting there saying, wow, okay, I achieved it. Well, now what? And then, I think that again, like finding joy in the journey and not the destination is something that I have I have really tried to put a lot of emphasis on, because the destination, it's going to happen for you, right? It's and if you're finding joy, and the more moments that you're spending in positive emotion with yourself, with loving yourself, and just feelings of joy, peace, happiness, whatever those positive emotions are that you want to experience, the more you can experience that throughout your day, every day, the
The more you
journey,
receive.
yeah, the journey becomes so intoxicating. It's so amazing that it's no longer about me trying to get to somewhere. It's about right now. It's about being present.
Love
And
that.
so finding that joy in the now and feeling good about right now, even though life may not be exactly how you pictured it would be, or you're having specific struggles, or expectations not being met, disappointments, etc. Stay in those positive feelings, those positive thoughts, and watch what shows up. The universe will deliver all the time. It always
Yeah.
does.
I love that you use the word joy in the journey, and I know that's kind of a saying, but the emotion of joy is super fascinating, because you're not even able to experience it unless you're in the present moment, right?
Right.
Like joy itself is about the present moment. And so many times um we get hits of different things outside of us that feel like, oh, I enjoyed that. But sustaining the emotion of joy, the only way to do that is in the present moment. And so you beautifully talked about the power, right? There's so much power in the emotion of staying present and being in joy. And the reason I emphasize power is because when you can do that, there's so much more receiving in the present, and that's really all that's available to us, right? Is being able to feel that much power and presence in the present moment. So I love that.